I remember once that I got a call. It must have been about 12:30 already at night. And they said, "Could you please go to the hospital because so and so is in the hospital and he's very, very sick." Now, the name did not strike a bell with me, and I didn't think he was a member of my synagogue. But anybody calls, I used to go all the time. So I went to the hospital, and I got to the hospital about 1 o'clock. This is a.m. And I remember that I waited there because they told me that the family was coming, but it was very foggy outside. So I asked the resident who was in the hospital. He said they haven't come yet, and at about 2 o'clock in the morning, we had a call from them, and the call said that it's so foggy outside, we haven't been able to come. I said that's okay, and they said, but anyway, Rabbi Khan. I said, no, this is not Rabbi Khan. This is Rabbi Segal. This is Rabbi Segal. We're members of Temple Emmanuel. But you're good enough over there. You say a prayer for Emmanuel there. So I said a prayer and I got back at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I got home. I got a good sleep. My first job was as a rabbi in Homestead, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I liked that job because I was able to go to the University of Pittsburgh also and take another degree while I was there. And I was there, and that was Homestead, Pennsylvania. It was actually right across the bridge from Pittsburgh. And it was a nice place, really nice, nice place, but a small congregation. I only had about 75 families in that congregation. But the people were very nice. I was not married at that time. And I did whatever I had to do over there, and I built my way up. I chose her. I didn't want to spend 4 years in medical school and then another 4 years, in a residency. I told her what I thought I liked about her. I was very complimentary. Is that I was very complimentary in my letters that I wrote to her. I popped the question. Nobody really knows. And the reason I say nobody really knows who's really the one, because look how many people are divorced over here right now. They thought this was the one, but 2 weeks later, they know this is not the one. But all I could say is, uh, I knew I wanted to spend time with her. I wanted her to be my wife. Well, love of family, life especially, children next. I have 4 children, grandchildren after that, their spouses, love, compassion, warmth of heart towards many people, especially to members of my family. I met Toby was living in Pennsylvania at that time in a town called McKeesport, Pennsylvania. She was actually born in a small town nearby, but I met her when she was living in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. And she had gone to school there. In fact, she was only 19 when I met her. I had a synagogue already. In fact, I had my second synagogue also. Um, and because Toby was from Pennsylvania, she lived first in Duquesne, Pennsylvania, where she was raised. and then in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. They're two relatively small cities, or smaller cities, I should say. It was very nice. I had a congregation there. Congregation, the people were exceedingly nice to me. And because when I was not married, what they would do is they would cook for me and send food over to my house and do everything like that. And besides being a rabbi, I enjoyed going to school there. I purposely chose Pittsburgh because I had a synagogue there. And beside that, I was able to go to graduate work at the University of Pittsburgh. And what happened to her was that she had one child, and the child was about 4 years of age, and a Nazi soldier grabbed the child away from her, and she actually saw him put her into a gas chamber, and she was killed, or she died. And she said since that day, she's never been the same person, absolutely never the same person. And one day, I remember she called me. She said, I'm in the Shamrock Hotel where I've been living for the last week. And I must tell you, Rabbi Segal, I want you to help me because I was raped last night here. And I knew that often she wasn't with it. So I said, I'll come over and I'll speak to you. And I went over to see her. And I could see she was suffering from one of her experiences. It was a very bad experience. Bringing up, she was telling me about her child who was 4 years of age. And I was listening to her. I said, how do you know that you were raped? She said, my dog told me. I said, where's your dog? She said, on the floor, my little dog over there told me that I was raped last night in this hotel room. And I said, well, let me try to find out something. And I got down on my hands and knees, and the little dog was really a little dog on the floor. And I went, bow wow, bow wow, bow wow. And the little dog probably didn't expect some fool to get down and to say bow wow. And the little dog started barking at me and backing up. And I did it again, and the dog did it again, and I did it, and the dog did it. I said, I must tell you, Mrs. So and so, the dog has told me that you're mistaken. You were not raped in the hotel here. The hotel was years ago, that a Shamrock Hotel here. And I said, you were not raped, the dog said. He says, how do you know? I said, I speak dog languages. I speak four languages. I speak Hebrew, I speak Yiddish, I speak English. I speak four languages, and dog language is one of them. He says, are you positive? I said, 100%. I learned how to do it. It's not an easy language to learn to speak. If you want to, I'll ask him again. Bow wow, bow wow, bow wow. And the dog answered me. I said, do you think the dog would answer me in the language that is his language itself? She said, no. He says, I'm glad you found out that I was not raped last night. It must have been a dream that I had. I said, that's absolutely what you had over there. It was a dream. That's what the dog surmised that it was here when I spoke to the dog. And she said, okay. She had been so affected by seeing her daughter actually thrown into a gas chamber by the Nazis that it affected her for years and years and years and years. This was in the 80s. So that means it was 40 years after the experience had taken place.
Okay.
I want to tell you also about another strange story that took place. I got a call one day from the police department in Houston. You've got to come down to the bayou on Chimney Rock, and I think it was South Braeswood, if I'm not mistaken. I said, why? Come down, you'll see why. And he said, I came down to the bayou, and there were a lot of people standing around outside. There was close to 100 people standing around the bayou. And in the bayou was a young girl, probably about 16 years of age, who happened to be a student of mine at the synagogue. And she's holding a knife. And there were three policemen in the bayou itself. I said, "What's happening?" They said, "The girl wants to commit suicide." And and she said that if we come close to her, she's going to stab herself or slit her throat. So I said, "You don't want to do that?" She said, "That's right, but we want you to help us. We want you to come down into the bayou itself, and you'll talk to her. And while you're talking to her, we're going to get up behind her and we will get her. This is what's going to happen." So I remember that she said to me, said, "Who are you?" I said, "You know me. I'm Rabbi Segal." Said, "You Rabbi Segal? Then you know my father. He's the cantor here." I said, "Yes." "Then you know Adon Olam, the song Adon Olam." I said, "Of course I do." He said, "Sing it to me over here." So I started to sing the song to her. He says, "Yes, you are singing it over here." And as I was singing the song to her, two policemen got up behind her and they grabbed hold of her and got the knife away from her. And they took her to a hospital. They took her to a hospital. That was another strange story that I had over here. I guess one of the most difficult incidents that I had as a rabbi was one day when I got a call from an undertaker here in Houston, Texas, telling me that I have to do something for him. Normally he would do it, but he never could do this. I said, "What is it?" He said, "One of the members of your congregation had a pickup truck, and he and his young son of 11 years of age went to a drive. They had to go someplace. I remember it was a Saturday night, and he said to me that he got a flat tire, and he must have been fixing his tire, and a pickup truck came and hit both of them as they were fixing the tire and killed them. And somebody has to go tell his wife that the two of them were killed. It must have been about 2 o'clock a.m., 2 a.m. It was in the middle of the night. And I had to go then and tell them this. And as I rang the bell, the woman, this man's wife, said, "I know it's something bad. Something must have happened to my husband. Anything happened to my son?" And I didn't notice that their young daughter, who must have been about 6 years of age, was standing in the other room. She must have gotten up when I rang the bell. And I told them what happened, that they had been killed by a car, and she began crying, terribly. And the little kid, who was about 6 years of age, came out, started kicking me in the leg. He says, "You're lying to my mother. You're lying to my mother. You're lying to my mother." And it was a very traumatic experience that people hope they'll never have to experience that in their lives at all. Um, I guess one of the most difficult times in my life also was when I had to bury a little child who was only 9 months old. And from there, I had to go to a bris, a circumcision. We do that when the boy is 8 days old. So I had to go from a sad situation of burying a 9-month-old child, a child that died of cancer, brain cancer actually, to a, a child who was to be circumcised at a bris, and everybody was dancing, and everybody was happy, and everybody was joyous. It was one emotion to another. The first emotion was down in the floor, and the other emotion was up in the heavens itself. One more I'd like to tell you over here. I remember there's an interesting story. I had a call from one of the hospitals over here. And the nurse called me and said, she was not a Jewish nurse. She said, I want you to know I have a Jewish man here. And it was a Catholic hospital. I don't remember the name of the Catholic hospital we had here in Houston. And I remember the nurse said to me, she said that we have a Jewish man here, and he does not speak English. He speaks some foreign tongue. I don't know what it is. And I wonder if you speak this language. And she told me that she can't speak to this man because she doesn't speak his language. She doesn't understand what he's saying, but he's obviously very upset. He's really upset. And I don't know what to do. So I said, let me speak to him. And I went over to him and I said, Vetter, that means like uncle, was is the tzuras? What is the trouble? I spoke to him in Yiddish. He said, in Yiddish, he said to me, this is terrible what they're doing to me over here. Just look over my head. There's a tselem, there's a cross right over my head. And they had it hanging on the wall. And I said, I knew what am I going to do? Say that to the nurse? The nurse might get upset. So I said, quickly, I thought of something. I said, she said, what language is he speaking? I said, he's speaking Yiddish. This is what he's speaking. She said, do you speak Yiddish? I said, fluently. I'll tell you what he says in a second. So I said to him, das ist nicht a Salem. This is not a cross. This is a mezuzah with handlebars on it, I thought. You know what a mezuzah is on the door? They have a mezuzah. And this was a mezuzah, I told her, with handlebars on it. Mezuzah has a quotation from the Bible. And every Jewish home, as you'll walk into the house over here, you'll see there's a mezuzah on the door as you come in. And they actually nail it into the doorpost as you come in. So he said to me, Du bist a Zedreiter. You're a crazy guy over here. I remember he said that to me. I'll tell you one more over here. I remember so very well once they told me that one of the porters who was working at our synagogue, I still remember his name. Oh, this must be from the late 60s or early 70s. His name was Willie, and he passed away. So they told me they're having a wake for Willie at his church, and it would be very nice if you could go over there and see the family and speak to the family and console them. So I said, absolutely, I will go there. As soon as it gets dark, I will be there. And I went over to the church, and I'll never forget what happened. As I went over here, the minister was speaking about Willie. And then when he saw me, I didn't know the minister at all, but when he saw me, he said, ladies and gentlemen, Willie's rabbi is here. It was a black church, a totally black church. I was there with Benny Katz, who was the executive director of the synagogue. We were the only two white people, and everybody else, there must have been about 200 black people in the church. And he said, Willie's rabbi is here. And he said, Willie's rabbi, didn't even know my name. He says, Rabbi, come up and give a eulogy for Willie. And I hadn't prepared anything, but I felt I knew him, and he was a very nice person. So I went up to the pulpit, and a very low and subdued voice, I said, Willie was a very fine person. And the minister said, I remember the minister must have been about 5'2" or 5'3". He said, say it again. And everybody, not everybody, but about 5 or 7 people raised their hand. They said, say it again. And I said, Willie was a very nice person. I felt I was saying in such a subdued uh, volume that they couldn't hear me. So many of the people now, instead of 7 or 8, must have been about 20 or 30, raised their hand. They all said, "Say it again." And I said, I felt they couldn't hear me. I have trouble hearing. So I said, Willie was a very nice person. I raised the volume of my voice. And the minister said, "Yes, Willie was a very nice person." And he said, "Say it again." Everybody was saying, "Say it again." I repeated it again. I said, "Willie was a very nice person." I said it louder. And the minister got a hold of my shoulders and he said, "Lead us." And they had a drummer there and they had a fellow playing a saxophone. And they played some music and the minister held my shoulders and he led me around. And all the people got up, must have been about 200 people. They walked around and Willie was in a tuxedo. I'd never seen him in a tuxedo. I always saw him in uh, dungarees or something like that. But this was an occasion, and he led me around, and I must tell you, it was a very jubilant moment that we had. He was a very nice person, and Willie was a very nice person. But it wasn't because of the volume of my voice. It was because of the spirit and the feeling and the emotions that this is an expression that they say, Willie is a very nice person. The person who called in said, "How is this patient?" And I looked it up and it said over there, he is critical, very critical. And I said to her, it says over here that he is in a very critical condition. It says, what does very critical mean? I said, he's not doing too well over here. And she said, what should I do? I said, the only thing that I think that you could do right now is say a prayer. She said, but I haven't prayed in a long, long time. I was a Baptist years ago, and my husband, whom I married, he's an atheist, and we never go to church anymore, and I don't pray anymore. So I said, well, would you like me to pray? He says, oh, for heaven's sakes, that would be the greatest thing that you could do for me. So I said, give me his name. So she gave me his name. And I said a prayer for this person, but in Hebrew. I said it in Hebrew. So she said to me, she said, I appreciate what you did very, very much, but I want you to know I had a major problem. She says, what's the problem? She said to me, I don't speak Spanish. I said, it's not Spanish, it's Hebrew. She says, it's even better. I said, why is that even better? She said, because that's God's language, and he won't have to call in an interpreter to interpret for him what this actually you said for him. Best advice, get a good education. If you want to get any place in life, you need an education. With an education, you can go far. Without an education, you're going no place. Education is very, very, very important. I can't stress that anymore. And that's what my my father stressed to his children. My mother did likewise. And that's what we all did. We all went to college. We all graduated. We all went to graduate school or professional school. It was really good. The hardest lesson I ever had to learn was when my son Michael was shot, and we didn't know if he's going to live. Three, I hate to call them bums, but they were bums, just came in, and for nothing at all, for $2 that he had, robbed him, and for no reason at all. The famous or infamous words were waste the dude, which means kill this guy. He didn't do anything for him. They told him to get on the floor, which he did. And the guy took a gun and just shot him in the head. And for quite some time, we didn't know if he would live. And it's been very difficult for him. And he was such a bright fellow. He's bright now also. But still, it was changed his entire way of life. And the girl he married and the daughter that they had, that was a very difficult thing to experience. That is a super trauma in one's life. I learned that you just have to go on for tomorrow. You can't just live in the past. You have to go on for tomorrow also. Because there's nothing to gain by living in the past. You just eat yourself up. You got to live in the present and the future. You can't live in the past. Spirituality means my personal attachment to God. Everybody has a different attachment to God. Some people feel a certain closeness. Others feel that God is walking through life together with them. But there has to be a special, different, individual attachment to God. That's what spirituality to me means. Let's see, how should I start this? How should I start this?
Well, you already had degrees in science, and you figured, I'm not going with anybody.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
I'll try to see if I can get into medical school. And
I was 28 years of age. I was not married, and I decided, you know what I ought to do? Maybe I ought to try to go into medical school. I was a rabbi at that time here, and I applied, and they accepted me at University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. This is what they did. And I went there for a couple of months, and then I met Toby. And as I said, it was a short time that we got engaged, and then we got that I proposed to her, and then we got engaged, and then we got married. And then I didn't want to wait 8 years before I'd have 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency. So what I did was I went back to the rabbinate. Well, everybody has regrets, but nothing that's would have changed my life. Nothing would have changed my life. You have to live in the present and the future. You can't live, if you have regrets, it means I want to go back to what I should have done. Oh, that's no good. You can eat yourself up alive, and that's not worth it. My grandparents, my father's parents were also very warm. My father's father had a beard. I'll never forget, before people were wearing beards, he wore a beard because it was part of his religion. He was a very Orthodox Jewish man, and he went to the synagogue every single day. He used to go every single day to the synagogue. A very compassionate individual, also. My father's mother, whose name was Libby, her name was Libby. She was a little different. Let me put it this way. She was, in fact, not a little different. She was quite a bit different. She didn't smile too much. My grandfather, even though it was difficult to tell under the beard, he was always a happy go lucky individual. My grandmother didn't smile too much, but she lived, by the way, they lived across the street from us. That's number one. My mother's mother, I didn't know because she passed away at a very young age. She must have been 30 something. She had cancer and she died early. But her father, oh, he looked like something from a magazine. He wore had a cane, walked with a cane, and he lived down the block also. He lived down our block also. Very distinguished looking individual. He looked as if he was an Englishman or something, with a beard also, but a short cropped a beard, not a longer one like my father's father.
Actually, I met him once before we really went out because he was the rabbi of the conservative synagogue in our town, and we belonged to the Reform Temple. I only went to the holidays on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur twice a year. But on this particular year, we had a college homecoming. I was a freshman at Ohio State. They asked me if I would be in a panel. Jack had the congregation, which was conservative. It ended early. He was walking home. He saw a light on in the temple. He thought, well, I have nothing to do. I'll go see what's happening. And it was the college homecoming. And he was sitting in the audience and he kept asking questions. And I had a date that night. And I thought, who is that guy just asking questions and questions? I have to get out of here. And that was the first time. But the next time we met, he was visiting my cousin in the hospital. She had her tonsils out, and I was there. And from then, it was history. He asked me out, and we went on our first date.
That's true.
Played tennis, but I couldn't play tennis.
Yeah,
So we went swimming instead.
I said, maybe you don't want to play tennis. Let's go swimming instead. So we went swimming instead.
And 2 months later, we were engaged. And 2 months after that, we were
Got
married.
married.
Very fast, very fast. And my whole life changed because I grew up in a reform home. Jack was Orthodox, kept kosher. I knew I would have to keep kosher because I couldn't be married to a rabbi and not. And my mother, the day after we became engaged, she changed her home to become a kosher home because she said that even though you may not live close to us, I always want Jack to feel comfortable in my home. She made her home kosher until the day she died. Her home was kosher in Florida.
We respected each other.
And but my life changed. But he was so great. He made life so wonderful because he explained everything. He knew this was a big change for me, and everything was really. Should I tell him the story about when we were first going together? I knew I couldn't eat. I ate non-kosher foods, but I didn't know I was going to marry a rabbi. And when we became engaged, I thought, oh my gosh, I had a cheeseburger with a milkshake, was even mixing meat and milk together.
Too many calories.
So I asked him what I could eat and what I couldn't eat. He said, well, you could have tuna fish, anything dairy. So we were engaged a short time, and my mother and I went to Pittsburgh, and I couldn't remember. We were looking at the menu. I said, I don't remember if it was tuna fish or chicken salad. What could I eat? So I ordered the chicken salad, and I came back. I said, was it tuna or chicken? He said, you could have the tuna, not the chicken. I went, I already goofed. But he made life very easy for me. It was smooth. And of course, I was 19. And when you're young like that, you just go with the flow. I mean, you're not set in your ways. Everything was easy. And going to school, getting pregnant, having a baby, being the wife of a rabbi in a small town, 3,000. I had never been away from home. Now we were 3,000 miles away from home, but he made it.
Her mother asked me, Jack, where are you going? She didn't know where I was going to accept the congregation. So I put it in this way. They lived in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. So I said, well, let me put it this way. We're moving west, but if we were moving east, we would be going to London, England.
My mother immediately lost 10 pounds because I was her, only daughter. And she thought, but she adjusted. My dad said to her, Sylvie, if they're happy, that's fine. And she adjusted real quickly. She did. I loved his parents. I mean, I don't think we ever had a disagreement. In fact, when his mother had major surgery at 89 years of age, she had a double bypass and a heart valve replacement. And she had to have surgery in Mount Sinai in New York. And then she went to a rehab place for 2 weeks. And Jack said, we'll be there. He said, send Toby. And I stayed there with her in the rehab place for 2 weeks. I just loved her. She was dynamite. She was funny. She did everything you asked. I remember when she came here for Passover one year, we went to Galveston. Scott was in medical school. And she was on a low salt diet because she had problems with her heart, with her legs. She had surgery on her legs, vascular surgery. And I said, Mom, I have corned beef. She said, what the heck? She said, I'm going to go to pot anyway. Just put in the pickles, just put in the. She didn't care. We just had a great time. She was just really easy. And she came once and she said, do you mind if I take over your kitchen? I said, me? Take over the whole kitchen. She said, do you have a rolling pin? I'll make you a pie. I said, me? Do I look like I have a rolling pin? She said, do you have a Coke bottle? I said, yeah. She said, okay, that's good enough. And she made the crust for the pie. She could do anything. Anything.
And I got along very well with her parents also.
My mother adored him. Adored him.
It was a good relationship.
I'll tell you one more funny thing that my dad, believe it or not, wanted to be a rabbi. He was a great orator in high school. He was the only one of the 6 children who went to college. They all got together. They were a poor family. But because my father went all over the state and was an orator, they said, I think Joe would be the best one to go to college. So they all pitched in for my father to go to Pitt. And but he wanted to be a rabbi. He thought that would be nice to be a rabbi, reform rabbi. So he didn't know much Hebrew. So he went to this big temple in Pittsburgh called Road of Shalom. And the rabbi said, I'll train you on Sundays if you want to be, I'll train you in Hebrew. But my mother at that time, she only knew Orthodox rabbis who came to her house, and that wasn't for my mother. So she said, no, I'm not going to be married to a rabbi. But when she met Jack, she wanted Jack as a son-in-law. Wasn't good enough for her to be married to a rabbi, but it was great for her daughter to be married to a rabbi. She adored him, adored him.
She was a nice woman.
That we had so many rabbis there. We had Orthodox rabbis, Reform rabbis.
There were 12 we invited, but 4 came. You remember? Yeah.
I mean, we just had rabbis. I only knew my rabbi from the temple. I never knew so many rabbis. In our town, I didn't even know there were other synagogues till I met Jack. I thought there was only one other synagogue. I knew about Jack's, but we only went with people from the temple. But he told me there was 3 or 4 Orthodox synagogues. I said, where? Where are they?
Small ones.
I didn't even know about it. And that probably. And it was real quick. I was thinking my honeymoon because I was thinking, Florida, God, I had never been away from a dirty steel town. I'm going to see palm trees. I'm going to a big hotel. That to me, I kept thinking that's going to be great. Nah, it was perfect.
That we would change? No, I don't think there was anything that we would change. I thought it was a darn good wedding. Had a good bride. That to me was the most important thing.
My uncles made it kosher. It was fine.
I couldn't care what they had. It was served for dinner there.
Can I digress the story that when we first met, can I tell about your mom? She didn't know that he in his first congregation, there was a family there. Actually, they knew my grandparents because they both had grocery stores near each other. They had lost a son in World War II. And when Jack became the rabbi, and when Jack was a rabbi in Homestead, Pennsylvania, they really adopted Jack as their son almost. It was the rabbi, but they kept Jack's picture on the mantle. They loved Jack. They gave him a key to the house. He came there all the time. And so they knew my family. They knew, my parents. And their daughter went to school with my mother. So when we got engaged, it was 2:00 in the morning. So 4:00 in the morning, he just went to the Coltons' home to tell them. It was 4:00 in the morning, woke them up, told them. 8:00 in the morning, they called Jack's parents. Now they knew Jack's parents because his mother would visit the congregation, so she knew the Coltons. So he called and he said, "Mom, I'm engaged." And engaged? What do you mean engaged? Who? Who are you going with? They didn't even know that he was even dating me. So the conversation, as I was told, went like this. Is she a member of your synagogue? No. Is she a member of the Pittsburgh synagogue? No. Well, where do they belong? The temple. The Reformed temple? I only have one more question. Does she come from a kosher home? Well, they're going to be kosher tomorrow. They're making their home kosher. Here's your dad. And when we met his parents for the first time, the Coltons came to New York with us. They wanted to make sure everything was smooth.
Tranquilize everybody.
And it was fine. Once I met his parents, my parents came, the Coltons came, and everything was fine. Should I tell him about the engagement ring? You want stories?
You could, go ahead.
We were engaged a whole month before I met his parents. He never gave me a ring. And everybody said, "Where's your engagement ring?" I said, "I don't know. He never gave me a ring." So he went to meet his parents. And day after I met his mother called me in the kitchen and she showed me a ring that was her mother's. It would have been his grandmother's ring. She said, "It's in an old setting, but if you like it, Toby, we'll get a platinum setting and we'll get a wedding band if you like it." My eyes almost popped out because I didn't get anything from him. I said, "I love it. I love it." And Jack stood behind and he said, "But if you don't like it, you don't have to take it." And I'm thinking in my mind, "You never offered me anything. Of course I'm going to take it." And I said, "And why didn't you ever offer me a ring?" He said, "I offered you myself. I didn't know you had to give a ring."
I didn't know that you had to give a ring that day. I figured I'd give it to you 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, something like that. I'm giving you myself. It's more
But
than a
his mother
ring.
gave me very good advice. She said, "There are two boys in the family, and let me give you advice. The Segal men don't shop. They just like to study. They don't go to, if you want anything, you go out and buy it. And then you come home and you say, 'I've saved you a trip for my anniversary. I love it. You don't have to go out and buy it.'" And so I've learned that lesson all through my life. And when I went to the first congregation, I said, I don't know what a rabbi's wife would do. And all I knew was I belonged to a youth group in the temple. So I said to him, I said, "Oh, I'll be acting in the youth group in the synagogue." He said, "Well, they're a little older than the youth group." So I said, "Well, maybe are they my parents' age? Are they middle age?" My mother was 42 at the time. My dad was 44. I thought they were middle age. He said, "Well, they're a little older than middle age." Well, they were like my grandparents. They were great to me. They took me in because I was the
Yeah.
youngest one in the congregation. They took me in. They sent me food when I was pregnant. They were just wonderful. So it was a great experience for my first congregation. Really, it was great. Right away.
I think 6 months
6 months
later, you were
later, I
pregnant.
was pregnant. Had Jeff during my uh, junior year in college, and 6 weeks after he was born, I was back in college. And when I did my student teaching, we only had one car. You drove me.
Yeah.
He drove me, and and I had a second child already when I was going for a master's degree. And I was in New York. He was working on a doctorate in New York. We had Lisa. And then when we came to Houston 5 years later, we had our youngest son, Scott. And so I was busy. But the best thing about it, I have to say, Jack never took a day off, ever. He worked 7 days, 7 nights. But his children, his family, if I would call him, he was there. Every night at dinner time, you came home at 6 o'clock. At 6:45, he was back doing his evening classes. But he was there for the kids every single night. And when our son Michael was hurt in college, he was badly injured in the second year of college. And he was in a year and a half in rehab. And before he was able to go back to school, back to college. And every night you would come to the hospital after work at 9 o'clock. He had to learn to read, to write, everything all over again.
All over, yeah.
And he would stay in the hospital with him from 8 o'clock till 11 every night. He practiced cards with him, reading.